Welcome to the ABA program, Demystifying the Judicial Clerkship Application Process and Experience, Part 2. The Federal Specialty Courts co-sponsored by the ABA Law Student Division and the ABA National Conference of Federal Trial Judges. I am Jordan Glasgow, and I will be serving as your moderator today. Joining me on the program is Judge Frank Bailey, U.S. Bankruptcy Court, District of Massachusetts, Boston, Massachusetts, Barbara Gilmore, Law Clerk to Chief Judge Melvin S. Hoffman of the U.S. Bankruptcy Court, District of Massachusetts in Boston, Massachusetts, Judge Delissa Ridgway of the U.S. Court of International Trade in New York City, New York, and Judge John A. Thwally, the Hearing Office Chief Administrative Law Judge of the Social Security Administration in Fayetteville, North Carolina. During this session, the faculty will be sharing invaluable insights into the federal court system, the clerkship application process, including OSCR, standing out in the application stacks, avoiding application and interview pitfalls, preparing for your clerkships, the quality of successful clerks, and intern opportunities in clerkships. Before we start the program with introductions, I would like to give you some housekeeping information. As a reminder to the audience that has joined this webinar, it is a listen-only mode. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's faculty by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we will collect these and address them as many as we can during the question and answer session at the end of the webinar. Now let's start the program off with introductions by the faculty. Judge Bailey, you can start us off.
All right. Thank you very much, Jordan, and welcome everyone to this program. We hope it's going to be useful for everyone, and we encourage questions as we go through the program. So, as mentioned, I'm a bankruptcy judge here in Boston at the District of Massachusetts. Judge Ridgway, Delissa Ridgway is a judge in the U.S. Court of International Trade, and she sits in New York City. Judge John Thwally is a hearing officer and chief of administrative judge at the Social Security Administration in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And Barbara Gilmore is a career law clerk to Chief Judge Melvin Hoffman, Bankruptcy Court, again in Boston. So I thank my fellow panelists for joining the program.
All right, so next we'll move on to the federal court system section, and Judge Bailey, you can take the lead.
I will. So, Jordan, thank you. The first thing that we wanted to point out was that there are you might focus your clerkship search on what I call the big three, but then you'd be missing out on a lot of opportunities for internships and clerkships. The big three in the federal system would be the United States District Court judges, the magistrate judge group within the U.S. District Court, and of course on the appellate level, the U.S. Circuit Courts. There are, however, many other federal courts in the system, and on this slide you'll see that we've listed some of them and not even all of them. And I've tried to indicate the number of clerks that each of the judges on these various courts has. So what we would like to impress upon you in this regard is research. Research these opportunities. You're all quite adept at operating through the internet, so try to find out what opportunities there are in various courts. We will talk about those opportunities today with respect to our own courts, but we couldn't possibly begin to tell you about all of the opportunities that exist in the federal system. You'll notice the slide is broken down into two major categories, judicial branch and executive branch. And the reason I did that in putting this slide together is that there are certain courts that are managed, if you will, through the Administrative Office of the United States Courts, and that's what we have under the judicial branch. There are actually many more judges that work for the various administrative law courts at various federal agencies in the U.S., and those are, some of them, not all of them, are listed under the executive branch bullet in this slide, just to give you an idea. I also want to point out that, and I'll quote Shakespeare, I think it's Shakespeare, you guys can fix me if I'm wrong, but a rose by any other name is still a rose. And there are many titles associated with people that serve as, in the capacity as a law clerk, as we all think of it, within the, to administrative law judges. And Judge Thawley may be able to talk more about that shortly. So I put on the slide, you know, sometimes they're called law clerks, sometimes staff attorneys, sometimes legal assistants. They might even be called judicial assistants. Some of these jobs are career jobs, and people will have them for many years, but very often these are 1 or 2 year commitments. And so it's, you know, immediate post-law school kind of an opportunity, and you really need to go on each of the websites of these various entities to discern, you know, what opportunities might exist in your area. So we're here today to talk about these specialty courts, and the first stopping point for us is educate yourself through research and through your career placement office at your law school about, you know, what opportunities might be out there. I don't know if
Judge Bailey, this is this is Lisa Ridgway. I'd like to just quickly jump in, as you've invited us to do, and particularly point to the U.S. Court of International Trade, which I refer to as the stealth court. That, of course, is my court, but very, very few people know about it. It is an Article III court, so it is in status equivalent to the U.S. District Court, the Courts of Appeals, and the U.S. Supreme Court, in the sense that judges are appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate with lifetime appointments. For anyone who has an interest in international law, this is the only court in the country where you would get a steady diet. Every single case that we handle has immediate implications for, you know, at least one country other than the United States. The court has exclusive nationwide jurisdiction over cases that involve the interpretation and application of the customs and the international trade laws. And there are a whole bunch, as Judge Bailey says, you really need to do your research if you're interested in the court. But there are quite a few unique features of the court. For example, although it's technically a trial court, there's really lots of research and writing. We have very few cases that go to trial. Most are on the administrative record. So the experience is very much like an appellate court. If we're in the courtroom 3 times a month, that's a busy month. It's mostly at our desk, you know, working on these very, very big, sophisticated cases. Also, another unique feature, although most cases are assigned to a single judge, the cases can be assigned to a 3-judge panel where there's a significant constitutional issue or a major issue of trade policy. So we're the only court in the country that's like that. The federal government is a party to every single case we hear, and we are the only court in the country, including the Supreme Court, that is empowered to hear cases in other countries, and we have done so. We're also the only court in the country that's doing what we do, that is interpreting the customs and international trade laws of the United States. So what we do is read very, very carefully by anyone in the field in the United States and a lot of people abroad, including, for example, the WTO. And sometimes it's almost a legislative function. So that's it on the Court of International Trade, just a quick intro. But if anyone's interested in international law, it's a really good place to think about.
Great, thank you so much for that, that overview. Next we'll move on to the application process and Oscar. And so with that, we'll jump right in. Barbara Gilmore will be taking the lead.
Sure, and as you can see, I am the only non-judge panelist. I am actually a career clerk. And so let me begin by telling you that most judges have law clerks. You can see that the specialty courts, at least those specialty courts that are Article I courts, such as the Bankruptcy Court, have 2 law clerks. They can have a law clerk and a judicial assistant, but they can have no more than 2 law clerks. Most of the judges have 2 law clerks. Sometimes 1 law clerk is a career clerk and 1 is a term clerk. And as Judge Bailey said, term clerks often serve 1 or 2 years at the judge's pleasure. Let me tell you a little bit about the application process in OSCAR, and at least the way that it has worked in our experience. OSCAR is the online system for clerkship application and review, and it's a website that's run by the federal courts. So its website is, as you probably all know, OSCAR, oscar.uscourts.gov. And OSCAR is good and it's bad. So as you can see, we say to OSCAR or not to OSCAR. But one of the advantages of OSCAR is that it's going to allow you to see those judges who have posted their clerkship opportunities on the OSCAR website, and you'll be able to hone in on the particular courts if you have an interest, for example, as Judge Ridgway said, in international trade or international law. You can hone in to see if there are judges at the international trade court who have posted. If you are interested in bankruptcy law, you can hone in and see if there are bankruptcy judges who have posted on the OSCAR website. It also allows you to hone in on the geography. So, for example, if you're in Hawaii and want to stay there, you're probably not going to apply for clerkship in Maine, because unlike law firms, which I believe still have the advantage if they want to bring you in for a second application to pay your travel, you have to travel for the government on your own time and on your own dime. So one of the disadvantages of OSCAR is that it's very easy to hit that submit button and blanket apply to all of the federal courts. We urge you not to do that. Please be judicious. Please think about what it is that you want to do. Do you want to focus your legal career at this point? Are you interested in a specialty court? Are you interested in a particular geographic area? As I said, if you have ties to California and you're going to stay there, you probably don't want to come to New England and experience all the fun in the snow. You probably want to stay where you're going to have fun in the sun. Also understand that not every judge uses OSCAR. In fact, many of the judges are moving away from OSCAR. I will tell you about the experience that we had. I currently clerk for Judge Mel Hoffman, who is the chief bankruptcy judge here in the District of Massachusetts, and before that I clerked for Judge Joel Rosenthal, his predecessor. Neither of them use OSCAR. With Judge Rosenthal, we started out using OSCAR when it first came into being about 10 years ago, and what we found is that we were wasting a lot of time sifting through applications for people who didn't have the background to do bankruptcy, who really didn't, based upon what we were seeing in the courses that they took, didn't have the interest in doing bankruptcy, and who had no ties at all with this geographic area. They had no ties to New England. So we were wasting a lot of time sifting through it. So we made the decision we weren't going to use OSCAR, and Judge Hoffman has never used OSCAR because of the difficulty with just wasting our time sifting through a lot of extraneous applications. So just because you don't see something on OSCAR doesn't mean that a judge isn't looking for a law clerk. There are lots of alternatives to OSCAR. Do not overlook your placement office. They are a great resource. In fact, what we do here in Judge Hoffman's chambers is every fall we send out letters to the law schools in the geographic area, the law schools where we've had former clerks graduate from, and we tell them we're looking. And we encourage them to please post the letter, and they're always happy to do that. And we tell them what it is we're looking for and what it is we want. Don't forget your contacts if you have any contacts with people in the court, great resource to ask if anyone is looking. If you know people who have clerked before, people who have graduated from your law school ahead of you, if they're clerking, don't be afraid to email them, call them, ask them, do they know of any opportunities? And your own initiative. I mean, there's nothing wrong with sending a letter in to a judge and applying. If you really have a burning desire to do bankruptcy here in Boston, there's no harm in sending out a letter. But before you do, you should try and find out, and it's easier if the judge is on Oscar, a little less so if the judge is not. Find out what it is that the judge is looking for. Is he looking for people who are in the top quarter of his class, top third of the class, top half of the class, or no class rank preference? Is he or she looking for someone who's been on law review? Are they looking for somebody with moot court experience? Are they looking for somebody who has maybe done a previous clerkship or who has worked at a firm? Because not everybody clerks directly from law school. In fact, that certainly was not my path. I was at a private law firm for 18 years, was a partner when I thought I was retired from the law, and Judge Rosenthal got appointed to the bench. He's somebody I knew when we were in practice together, and he called me up one day and told me he had a very crazy idea that we should go to lunch, and he began to sell me on the idea that I should become a career clerk for him, and if anybody knows Judge Rosenthal, he could sell snow to the Eskimos. So I signed up, and I have to say I've been doing this for, oh gosh, 14 and a half years, and it really is fun, but this became a second career for me. So, you know, even if you don't get a clerkship right out of law school and you're working at a firm and you have that burning desire to do bankruptcy, look around. Specialized areas of the law, with a lot of the particularized courts, and it certainly is true of bankruptcy. I'm not saying you can't learn bankruptcy, but I think most bankruptcy judges are looking for someone who has taken bankruptcy in law school, has taken secured transactions, because a lot of what we do, we're a code-based court. I tell people we live and die by the bankruptcy code and the bankruptcy rules. If you've taken a course in law school that has given you some basic familiarity with it, you're a step ahead. If you want to do taxes and you're going to apply to the tax court, it would be kind of odd to see an application from you come in and you've never taken a tax course in law school. So take a look at your background realistically and know where you might be a good fit or a bad fit or an otherwise fit. As I say, we don't use Oscar. We encourage people to send us letters with a writing sample. A writing sample is key, and I think Judge Ridgway will talk about this when she talks about the qualities of a successful law clerk. Most courts, even courts such as a bankruptcy court where the judges spend a fair amount of time in court, are really based in large part on your ability to research and write. You'll be doing a lot of what you did in your research and writing classes in law school. You'll be looking at particular issues because despite the fact we're a code course, there's a lot in the code that it remains unanswered, and it will be up to you to begin to help the judge ferret out what the answer might be. So you have to really be good at research and writing, and you have to enjoy research and writing. If you don't, it's going to be a very long and very miserable year, and I suspect that that's true no matter what court you are clerking for. You will have an opportunity, certainly in bankruptcy court, and I suspect many of the other specialized courts, perhaps less so at Judge Ridgway's court, but you'll have an opportunity to go to court to see what's happening. But at the end of the day, your responsibilities will be research and writing and being able to discuss an issue of the law with the judge, because none of us can know everything. And it amazes me. I practiced bankruptcy for 18 years at a private law firm. I've been clerking for 14 and a half years, and I am always amazed at how many issues will pop up, and I'll think, boy, that's a new one. I have never seen that before. One of the wonderful, wonderful things about clerking is that it gives you an opportunity to see issues that your colleagues who don't clerk will never see and never have the opportunity to think about. So that's my pitch as to why you should do it. Use Oscar if it has postings that fit in with what you're looking for, but don't overlook your placement office, your contact with other folks, and your own initiative. And good luck in the process. I will tell you what I always tell the term clerks. If you clerk, you will begin your legal career with the best job you're ever going to have in the law.
Great, thank you. So we have a couple questions relating
Sure.
to Oscar. One of the questions is about follow-up materials, confirming that the materials have been received. One of our viewers has sent materials via Oscar but hasn't received anything back stating that those materials have reached their proper destination. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. My recollection from having used Oscar several years ago was that when I would open the materials, I would click, and that would be a signal to Oscar that I had received the materials and, in fact, had reviewed them. And then when the applicant wanted to check on the status, he would see that they were received and reviewed. But one thing, whether you apply on Oscar or whether you apply by sending a letter and your application packet to a judge directly to his or her chambers, it's sort of a lot like dating, I think. You know, sometimes you get kind of antsy if you're going to get that follow-up date. You know, is there going to be a second date? You just have to be patient sometimes and let the process run its course. You know, we'll get applications in from people, and then we start to get bombarded from people saying, "Did you get it?" You know, or I was in last week for an interview. What's the status? And I always tell people, you know, when you clerk for a judge, you're in chambers, and most of these chambers are pretty small. Not necessarily in terms of geography, but in terms of the number of people who have to work closely together. And how you come across, and I think Judge Ridgway will talk about this more, your personality traits are a factor in the decision that judges, I think, use to hire you or not hire you. And if you're a real nervous Nelly and you're always sort of pushing and being nudgy about the application process, you're doing yourself a disservice. So I know it's hard, but be patient. If your application looks good, that second date will come.
Great, that's really helpful. And secondly, we have another question, and we recently discussed the differences between an executive branch court and a judicial branch court. And so our question is, do bankruptcy judges hire on the same schedule as Article 3 judges?
I'll be happy to address that.
Yes,
the answer is yes. Generally, we transition our law clerks in September, generally. So they graduate from law school, go take the bar exam, and start with us sometime around right after Labor Day. And this is Judge Bailey, I have my law clerks for 2 years, and some judges in our system have their law clerks for 1 year. In the bankruptcy system, but otherwise we're very much on the same schedule.
And this is Barbara. One thing I would add is I think all the judges are cognizant of what a tough job market it is for people trying to get jobs at law firms. So as you're getting close to the end of your clerkships, many of the judges, and I know both Judge Rosenthal and Judge Hoffman have said this to clerks who have gotten offers. If the law firm needs you to start before your clerkship would end, don't be afraid to talk to the judge about that, because they both have taken the position that they don't want to stand in the way of a clerk having a good job opportunity in the private sector, because we know how tough the market is out there right now. And I think Judge Bailey, I know Judge Bailey for a fact, you've had a clerk that you've also allowed to leave before his clerkship ended because he had a wonderful job opportunity in the private sector.
Right. That was sort of unheard of 20 years ago, that law firms would have someone leave their clerkship to join them, but it's not unheard of now. And I'm certainly willing to allow someone to move on if that's what they want to do. But normally it would be, you know, somewhere deep into their second year. It wouldn't be before that.
Great. All right, so let's move on to our standing out section. So we're going to now discuss standing out in the application stacks, because obviously judges get several dozen applications every year for these positions. So if Judge Ridgway wants to take the lead, we'll move on.
Of course. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone who's listening in today. 2 points just quickly to transition on Barbara's excellent presentation. One is to be on the lookout. Barbara talked about looking at Oscar and then the fact that a lot of judges don't use Oscar. There are actually all the time judges being confirmed or being hired, if you will, but in the Article 3 branch being confirmed. So for example, on my court, we actually have 4 vacancies right now, which means that there are 4 people out there who are pending before the Senate who will be judges, and so they're going to be hiring sort of out of cycle. So that's often positions that are kind of off the radar screen for a lot of people, and you may be able to get an edge by identifying and applying to those individuals who are going to be becoming judges but are not yet judges and therefore are not yet in the regular hiring cycle. Second quick point is that although Barbara very correctly pointed out the issues of geography and the fact that that can be a point that a judge will consider in deciding which applicants to interview and which applicants to hire. It can also work in another direction. In other words, if you want to be a federal judicial law clerk, your chances are probably better in North Dakota or South Dakota than they are in New York, because everybody is applying to New York and Washington, D.C., for example. And so if what you really want to do is be a clerk, then you should think about some sort of out-of-the-way destinations. As far as what stands out in the application stack, so one quick pointer is to always send all of the materials that the judge requests. If the judge asks for your undergraduate transcript in addition to your law school transcript and you don't send it, that is a definite negative. You're not following instructions, and it may even get you kicked out of the applicant pool. So it's going to vary from one judge to the next, so be sure to be attentive to that. Also, think about the outside envelope in which you send your application package. Many people just assume that's going to go straight into trash, and so you get these like wild scrawled, handwritten. You want to be sure, if it's handwritten, at least that it's neat, because people may actually be looking at that and, judging you on neatness and attention to detail, things like that. The cover letter. Some judges read it, some judges don't. So you need to assume that the cover letter is going to be read. And it goes without saying that there should be absolutely no typos. As judges, we assume that if you can't manage to get your cover letter, your resume, and your writing sample to us without typos in it, then there's absolutely no chance that you're going to be able to get an opinion out the door without typos. So it's really, really critical that there not be typos. You'd also be surprised how many times the name of the judge is misspelled, so that's critical. And if you are doing, a number of letters at the same time, it's not unusual if you're not really careful. We see a lot of mistakes where people get, accidentally send to me a letter that they intended to go to another judge. So it will have another judge's name and the address on the letter, and then it'll say, Dear Judge Ridgway, or vice versa. So if you're doing letters in mass bundles, be really attentive to that. The proper format of the cover letter in the address would be to say the Honorable Frank Bailey, for example, or HON period Frank Bailey, not the Honorable Judge Frank Bailey. And you just want to demonstrate sophistication and attention to detail there. But then in the greeting, you would say, Dear Judge Bailey, or Dear Chief Judge Bailey, if it's the Chief Judge, not Dear Honorable Judge or anything like that. And try to avoid beginning the cover letter with the word I. That's an old-fashioned thing, but a lot of people still pick up on it in the judge's generation. And you definitely do not want to begin by saying, I am, and then giving your name, because your name is in the signature line of the letter, so it's a very unsophisticated thing to do. Do not squander your cover letter. It's a real wasted opportunity if you do that. You don't want to just say, enclosed, please find my resume and supporting materials and application for a judicial clerkship in your chambers. That's really, unimaginative. It's definitely not good advocacy. So instead, you want to use your cover letter as a great piece of advocacy that tells a story, that weaves together the various elements of your background and experience to sort of tell a story about how you're the perfect, applicant for this clerkship opportunity, and to also distinguish yourself from other applicants. So, for example, if, for let's say my court, so let's say that, your family worked in the export-import business. So you could say that, you've been interested in the import-export business since you were a child because of your family's, business, blah, 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 and then talk about the courses that you've taken and so forth. And Barbara talked about the geographic issue, so I would reiterate that. If you've got a geographic issue, you may want to address that, sort of anticipate and address it just like you would any other potentially negative aspect of your application. For example, a bad grade or two in your first year of law school, or to explain why you chose to attend a lower tier law school even though you were accepted at a top law school. I mean, this is the place to get that in. You can't really say that on your resume, but if you decided to stay close to home so that you could care for a family member who was ill, or because you've got a fantastic scholarship package, something like that, and therefore turned down Harvard, this is the place to say it. You're not going to put turned down Harvard on your resume, but you can put it in the cover letter. Notwithstanding everything I just said, the cover letter should never be more than 1 page. So you have to write tightly, but it really should be a good piece of advocacy. And it's a real place to get a leg up on other applicants, because most people will write the plain vanilla, enclosed, please find my resume and application for your clerkship in your chambers, which is, like I say, just a waste. The resume, you could say a lot about that. Let me give you a couple of specifics. One is definitely no typos. Again, if you can't give me a resume, cover letter, and writing sample without typos, then there's no chance you're going to be able to do so with an opinion. So typos are the kiss of death. You want to tailor the resume to the position, so the specific court, and possibly even the specific judge to whom you're applying, if you know specific things about that judge. And it goes without saying that you want to highlight, relevant classes, but also relevant experience, not just job experience. If your grades are not spectacular, or even if they are, but you also had a spectacular LSAT, you may want to put your LSAT on your resume. As a general rule, you don't want to put hobbies, but if you want to include a couple, again, judges and employers generally have different views on this, but just be thoughtful about what you put on your. It's not your Facebook page. Let's say that.
Appears that we lost Judge Ridgway, so we'll hopefully get her back. Oh, I apologize. I must have lost her myself then.
Can everyone else hear Judge Ridgway? She was just presenting.
I certainly can. This is Barbara.
Okay, thank you. Then I'll just continue. I don't want to waste any more time. Do we have a way of checking whether the audience can hear? I assume we would have heard if they couldn't.
I'm sure they can, because on the dashboard it says that you're speaking, so it's
great.
hearing you.
I'll just keep going then really quickly. I'm trying to cover a lot in a very short period of time. Yes. Another thing on your resume is to signal diversity. Most judges, and indeed most employers generally, are interested in diversity. And so, if you are a person of color, and you're you can signal that through membership in the Association of Black American Law Students. Things like that may work in your favor. If your gender is not obvious from your name, indicate it on your resume. Just before your name, put Mr. or Ms. if it's not obvious. And for example, our moderator is named Jordan. Jordan is either a man's name or a woman's name these days in the United States, and there are a whole bunch of psychological studies that show that when people look at a resume, they want to know whether it is the resume of a man or a woman. I'm not going to say whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying it is, and that you may be disadvantaged if someone looks at your resume and does not know whether or not you are a male or a female. It's obviously even more of an issue for job applicants who have names that are not of English derivation. So that's just psychologically a big factor, apparently. And then another thing on the resume, and I think most people do this anyway, is to be sure to list publications and organizations in which you are active. Don't list ABA Law Student Division if you've never really done anything in the Law Student Division, if you don't participate at all, for example, because it's likely that you'll be asked about it. And if you can't say that you've done anything, then it doesn't work to your advantage. But if you are active, people are really looking for a well-rounded applicant. As Barbara said before, Chambers is a very intimate environment, and we want people who, can play well and work well with others. So, writing sample quickly, just a few things. No typos, absolutely no typos, as I've said before, and use reasonably proper citation format. It does not have to be rigid adherence to the Blue Book, but it's got to be, reasonably consistent with the Blue Book and reasonably consistent throughout the document. Different views on this point, but as a general rule, I don't think it's as critical that it relates to, the writing sample relates to the specialized area of the court's work. They're just really probably just looking to see, can you write? So don't be so worried about the subject matter of the writing sample. You should indicate in some way the extent to which the work has benefited from editing by others, although, to be candid, the judge is nevertheless going to assume that you are understating the extent to which it has been edited. And you should know, I know that in Barbara's chambers they give a writing test. We also give a brief writing test as part of our application process. So you're going to be totally busted if you turn in a writing sample that's been heavily edited, and then in the writing process, we see that you really are not a very good writer, or certainly not as good as you portrayed yourself in the writing sample that you submitted. In terms of the length of the writing sample, 5 to 10 pages is fine. Longer is also fine, although probably I will just read some random part of a much longer writing sample to get a feel for your writing style. And the last thing I wanted to say something about is the letters of recommendation. And there I just want to suggest that you really think hard about who you ask to write letters of recommendation. It's best to have letters written by people who know you well, who can speak about you personally and specifically, give specific anecdotes. And especially if those anecdotes are relevant to your qualifications for the clerkship in particular. So for my court, for example, a letter of recommendation from your administrative law professor or your international trade professor or your international business transactions professor would be particularly meaningful. As judges, we all see a lot of form letters of recommendation, and we can recognize them very quickly. I've even, there are professors I know at some of the big schools that send out virtually the identical letter of recommendation for every applicant that they recommend. I mean, literally almost identical wording. And that's not particularly helpful for the applicant. I recommend strongly that you either do a draft letter of recommendation, or I think there's a good chance you're not going to feel comfortable doing that, but that you at least do bullet points or talking points for the law professor or whoever is writing the letter of recommendation. So that they know, because you know what parts of your background and experience and coursework are going to best suit you and what they're able to suit you for the clerkship and what they are able to speak to. But then you also want to be sure that you don't the same talking points or handout to everybody, because then if all of your letters of recommendation use them virtually verbatim, then that's going to stick out. So just put some thought into it. But you're likely to get better letters of recommendation if you give some help to the person whom you are asking to write that letter of recommendation. And I got to tell you, one of the clerks I've got now, best thing, I got, sort of a standard letter of recommendation. It was a little bit tailored, but scrawled across the bottom, the judge for whom he had interned wrote, "What a great kid," handwritten. And that really spoke to me. So, look for that kind of personal touch. And in terms of the people who write the, another point is, it's great if you can get a law professor or a practitioner in the area or a former law clerk of the judge, someone who really knows the judge. That letter is likely to be more meaningful to the judge than just a letter from someone who does not know the judge and whom the judge does not know.
Great. Thank you so much, Judge Ridgway. Next, we'll move on to the interview process with Judge Thwally. So if you want to take the lead, go right ahead.
Sure. Let me go back and cover a couple of things, re-emphasize a few points that have been made. Knowledge is power, and a little bit of research will get you a long way. The reason that I say that is, in part, from the administrative or executive perspective, there are about 1,800 federal administrative law judges scattered across the country in locations far and wide, from San Juan to Anchorage, from Honolulu to Portland, Maine. I think the U.S. Postal Service has one, and the Social Security Administration, where I work, has about 1,500. So the other 300, from the 1,500 of the Social Security Administration to what's in the remaining federal agencies, are scattered across a wide variety of agencies. I think the Postal Service has one, the Coast Guard has 6 or 7. So that research is going to help you figure out where those administrative law judges are and what sort of practices they have. A number of those agencies, perhaps all, will use the USA Jobs website application process that will allow you to store documents, so you can have your resume there ready to go for uploading, writing samples, etc. So that as you're doing searches on USA Jobs and you see attorney advisor openings, which is sort of the GS, Federal Civil Service title for the positions, even though some agencies do call them law clerks, you'll be able to immediately launch an internet online application process that is pretty quick and pretty painless. I would also agree with the newly appointed judges emphasis. If you really want a clerk, then you need to sort of come at it from every angle that you can think of. And I got my clerkship because I kept track of the newly appointed judges, and literally in my last semester of law school was traveling from University of California, Davis, where I went to law school, down to Fresno, the federal courthouse in Fresno, California, so that I could work for at least a day a week for the judge who had been appointed to sit in Yosemite National Park. So watching the newly appointed judges, if things are a little bit off cycle or the traditional timing hasn't worked for you, is very important. As far as the interview process goes, if you follow that sort of normal civil service model, which is what I think the usual federal agency will follow, after the online application process through USA Jobs, you are probably going to arrive, if selected for an interview, at a panel interview. And so that will be the normal panel interview that you would expect. There may be administrative law judges sitting in on that panel, as well as management staff, for example, a hearing office director, the top non-judge supervisor in the office, to get a feel for what you would be like as an employee as in a law clerk position for that agency or for that particular office. So you'll probably have several people asking you questions and assessing not only your legal acumen, if you will, but also your, and it was mentioned before, the chambers environment is an intimate, small team kind of environment. There are a number of federal agencies where the hearing operation is a small team, intimate environment, and they're going to want to make sure that you fit with their work family, their work team. So be cognizant of the interpersonal skills during the interview process, as well as the legal aspect of your application. And as far as things that may help you stand out or that may give you a leg up, I agree with law school placement offices. Obviously, USA Jobs is an important resource. During my law school time, was not in the Inn of Court. However, later, some years into my practice, the law professor that I worked for during law school invited me to join the Inn of Court that was affiliated with UC Davis. It was a fabulous experience. I really believe in the emphasis of the Inns of Court, which is the ethical professional practice of law with collegiality between the bench and the bar. And if you have access to that process, I would very much encourage you to participate in it, as it will provide you with the ability to talk to, meet, and gain knowledge and wisdom from a wide variety of practitioners, law professors, and judges. So that's another way that you can use experience to be able to access the clerkship process potentially. And one of my friends at the Federal Mine Safety Health Regulatory Commission noted that one important source of information from him as to future law clerks were his currently serving law clerks. So the alumni connection, I don't think, can be overemphasized enough. And I would be happy to hear from other panel members if they have other thoughts on the interview process.
This is Frank, Judge Bailey. I wanted to say only one thing about this because I think Judge Thawley has covered it very well. I get more from the questions that the applicants ask me in a way than I do from their answers to my questions. For example, when I have an applicant who says, during my clerkship here, would I have the opportunity to, go to court, help you with CLE programs that you're speaking on, maybe write an article with you? Will I have a chance to interact with the other judges in the court? Will I have a chance to interact with training with the other law clerks? Those are the kinds of things that say to me, this person, really understands that this is an important year for them. And so, go in, and that's what you can't prepare the answers to questions so much that you're going to be posed, that will be posed to you, but you can prepare your questions very well. And be prepared to ask questions to the current law clerks because they are going to interview you, guaranteed. And that matters a lot.
Absolutely.
That feedback matters tremendously to the judge.
Right.
Great.
And this is Barbara, and I will just tell you from personal experience, when someone comes in after in our chambers, they usually meet first with Judge Hoffman, and then they come in and they interview with me. And when I ask them if they have any questions, a kiss of death is when they say, no, I think we pretty much covered it. And I thought, yeah. Yeah.
This is Judge Ridgway. I would just say to be nice to everyone. And I mean that because many judges in the hiring process think the input of their assistant, and so if they have an assistant, so if you've blown off the assistant or the court clerk, or that is the kiss of death, as Barbara would put it. I think sometimes the clerk interview the applicants before the applicant meets the judge, and sometimes it's the other way around. There's no good way to predict that, but you're almost always going to interview with both the clerks and the judge. We've already talked about the writing test. You're not necessarily going to know that in advance, but you should be prepared for it. Definitely send thank yous, and it's not a debate between email versus snail mail. You should do both. They can be really brief, but you should definitely do both. One is immediate, and then one received a couple days later through regular U.S. mail is a very nice follow-up, especially if it's handwritten, if your handwriting isn't too bad. And be sure to write to everybody, both the law clerks and the judge, and again, to spell everybody's name correctly. And the last quick point, send another thank you even if you are not offered the position. You never know. Clerkships pop up all the time. One of the judges...
Great idea.
One of the judges' clerks may fall through, or another judge may have a sudden vacancy and need to hire someone very quickly. And if it just signals your interest in the position, and it signals your attention to detail and so forth. So send a thank you even if you don't get the job.
Yeah, I want to echo that last point. I think it's an excellent point that I hadn't even ever thought to make. But sometimes in our system, we are funded for an additional law clerk, and we may not know when that's going to happen. But in bankruptcy, if we get a big case, if we get a unique case, I had a Chapter 9 case, which was a municipal bankruptcy, like Detroit. It wasn't Detroit, but like Detroit. And I was funded by the circuit or by the administrative office for a third law clerk for that 2-year period. And if I had turned you down, and you sent me a note, like Judge Ridgway just suggested, I might very well have said, boy, I was impressed with that. let's have that person back in, and let's see, now I have funding for another law clerk.
Those are all great points, and I think some of the points lead into our next slide, avoiding pitfalls in the interview and application process. So Judge Bailey, would you like to discuss that a bit?
I will. Thanks, Jordan. And I just want to say that I know we're up against time here, and that's a good thing, but I'm going to go rather quickly through this and ask for other comments from the other panelists, but much of it's been covered. So pitfalls in application process, you know, Barbara said, don't blanket the world. You're better off to target fewer judges, but show them that you really want to clerk for them and give them a good reason for it. You know, don't blanket the world. The cover letter, you know, I read the cover letters. I think they're vitally important. And I realize that, you know, a very important aspect of that is to talk about your non-law work, talk about your the things in your life, either your undergraduate education, you know, that would say, I'd be a good bankruptcy law clerk because I worked at a bank for a period of time, or you know, I took finance courses. You know, I'm always looking for someone who can understand the business, underlying business issues, because they're often pretty complicated. So that makes you stand out. Letters of recommendation, another pitfall is, you know, I'm not impressed if I get a letter from a U.S. Senator. I'm really not. I'm impressed when I get a letter from somebody that knows you and can tell me why you will succeed as my law clerk. And that letter of recommendation many times is the thing that's the most important thing that I've received concerning a candidate. So, you know, do your best to get the right person. I'd rather have your writing instructor than the dean if the writing instructor really knows you, not only as a writer, you know, but as a diligent, hardworking person. As far as the interviews are concerned, well, don't go in and ask about how many hours you're going to have to work. Just don't ask it. It's a hard job. It's a job in which you're going to be asked to do an awful lot at certain periods of time. It's like your residency, you know, for medicine. So, you know, go in and be prepared to work very, very hard, and don't go in and question those things, I think. Anyway, the other thing about during the interview process, you know, go in with your questions worked out, be prepared to ask them, be responsive to the answers that you get so you can do follow-up, because it shows that you're a good listener. Anyway, so those are my pitfalls. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that before I move on to prepare.
This is Barbara, and I would add, I mean, part of the reason for the interview, in fact, the big reason for the interview is, again, to emphasize, chambers are an intimate place, and we just want to be sure that you can come in and join the team, and that, you know, it's not going to be a long, miserable year for you and for us. So you want to be on during the interview process. You need to show some energy, some enthusiasm that you really want the position. And one question that I always ask people when I'm talking to them is, you know, what's the one thing you'd like to tell me about yourself that's not on your resume? And often that ties in with Judge Ridgway's point. Maybe that's the kind of information you want to include in your cover letter, but a lot of people don't. We tend to see a lot of those sort of plain vanilla cover letters. You know, we've had people say, no, you know, not much, and I think, God, that's kind of sad if the resume is the sum total of your life, and I'm sure it's not true. So think of something interesting. You know, someone may want to ask you about, and you know, maybe you want to tell me that, you know, last summer you and your cousin went and saw a baseball game at every stadium in the United States. Just some little interesting tidbit about you that we wouldn't be able to tell from your cover letter and your resume, to just show us you have a personality.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And with moving on from there, I think, Judge Ridgway, if you want to introduce the qualities of a successful clerk once you actually accept that position, if you could quickly go over that, that'd be great.
I'm happy to. Frank, did you also quickly want to just talk about prep for the clerkship? In other words, once you've got the job?
Thanks, Lisa. I'll just say very quickly on that point that so now you've got the job, you want to be successful in that job, and so things that people have done when they have the job offer during that sometimes almost a year period before they come work here, they will ask me to let them know if there are any big hearings coming along. They'd like to come watch them. Sometimes I'll get notes saying, they read my case, an opinion that I wrote on a particular subject that intrigued them, so I'll know they're following what we're doing and try to understand my standards by looking at the kinds of things that we're issuing. Now, the kinds of things you can do for bankruptcy court. Take bankruptcy is always a useful thing. Secured transactions, Barbara mentioned, but in any federal court, evidence, the federal courts course, if you have that opportunity, an advanced civil procedure course some law schools offer, I suggest every one of those courses. Lisa, that's it for, there's so much more I could say, but
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. The qualities of successful clerks then, I know we're moving really quickly. So the job description, and I think this is true not only for judges, but even if you go to a private firm, the job description is make me, the judge or the supervisor, look good. Really it's that broad. And one of the things that we most value is just pure, unbridled loyalty and discretion. It's also great to appreciate and value that this is an opportunity that very, very, very few lawyers ever have. Judge Bailey equated it to a residency. It's not really, because basically every doctor does a residency, but very, very, very few lawyers ever get to be a judicial clerk, get to see the world from this side of the bench, and especially to do so early in your career. So if you are fortunate enough to get a clerkship, squeeze every single drop of juice out of that orange. Just assume that you're going to work harder than you ever will, and believe me, it's going to pay off just beyond measure. It's just a potential for an incredible one-on-one mentorship that you're never going to have duplicated again, ever, and most people will never have. Obviously, research, writing, and editing skills are incredibly important. Blue booking skills, analytical rigor is one. Just, not just reading the briefs, but really thinking about it, and this is where the practical real-life experience comes in. That is a real added value, but really thinking hard about the deeper policy and legal issues. That kind of analytical rigor is something that doesn't get tested as much in law school and is incredibly valuable in chambers. We also look for law clerks who will challenge the judge, even if it's only to play devil's advocate. We do not want a yes man or a yes woman as a law clerk. Our decisions and our written opinions are going to be much stronger if they're tested by debate with our law clerks back and forth. So that's incredibly important. Time management, we are all so overwhelmed these days. All of the courts are so overwhelmed. So time management is going to be more important than it's ever been in your life and probably will ever be in your life. And an awareness of the workload, a general willingness to do whatever it takes to get the job done and to get it done right, whether that means, long hours, weekends. Again, this is something you're going to do for just 2 years in your life. You're going to do it early in your career, and it's really going to repay you, so just make the commitment. Maturity and judgment, we want to know that, if most of us don't have assistants or secretaries anymore, we just have law clerks, and we want to know if we leave chambers that you're going to be able to discern what you need to interrupt us for if we're on vacation, and what doesn't merit an interruption. We've already talked about the importance of, personality and chemistry with others in chambers. We want someone who will work and play well with others. My chambers here at the court are known as the nice chambers and the fun chambers, and I really do that, and I tell all of my classes of law clerks. We also want people who are good court and corporate citizens. They serve as ambassadors for the court and the judge with respect to the bench, and help us bring in future interns and law clerks, as some of the other speakers today have mentioned. And then lastly, we really like law clerks who stay in touch after the end of their clerkship. You know, I've performed marriages for many of my law clerks. They come back and attend events at the court reunions of law clerks, but also portrait hangings and swearing-ins of new judges and so forth. They refer potential interns and law clerks, and they organize other former law clerks to, you know, do events for the court. So all of those things, you know, are ways to stay in touch with the judge after the law clerk, and it helps both the judge and you.
I think it's important to note that the federal bench is a family, and if you were to intern for me at the bankruptcy court, and then it turned out that you had tremendous interest in international law, I saw that because you're just being formed as a law student. I might very well write a letter to Judge Ridgway and recommend you. And I think she would say that would go a long way. That recommendation would be very meaningful to her.
I'd hire you on the spot, actually.
hardly, but that you really are part of the family. And many of my interns have, and we're going to get into this next, but many of my interns, you know, have ended up working for my colleagues around the country, not just here. So, you know, if you have an opportunity to be an intern in a federal chambers, it's going to help you not only with that judge and not only with that court, but around the whole system, because we rely on one another.
Right. Thank you so much for your insight. And like Judge Bailey said, we're going to shift a little bit and talk about internship opportunities in general, the ABA section of litigation, Judicial Intern Opportunity Program, and the ABA Judicial Clerkship Program. So Judge Thwally, you can get us started on the internships in general.
Absolutely, I'd be glad to. I'll just tell you my story because I think it's illustrative. I was not in the top 5% of my law school class, which I suppose would have canceled me from consideration by some federal judge. But I really wanted to be a clerk. I wanted that experience. And so, as I've already told you, I found a judge that was newly appointed who needed the help, and so I worked with him and for him during my last semester of law school. But the way I got there was an internship. I figured if I could prove to a judge that I could do the job, research, writing, the chemistry and camaraderie of the small team of the chambers, and as an intern, then I would be that much more of a leg up for a federal clerkship. It's exactly what I did. Justice Rod Davis, the California Court of Appeals in Sacramento, was became a wonderful mentor to me, and throughout my career, before I became a federal ALJ and left California. And it was in part that recommendation of the job that I did for him that helped me to get my federal clerkship. And I will echo what the other judges have said here. The judge that I clerked for became a mentor and almost like another grandfather to me. I visited him from time to time in Yosemite before he passed away, unfortunately. And I think the last time that I saw him alive, I took the woman who is now my wife, she was then my fiance, to Yosemite because I wanted her to meet this man who had been such a force in my life, and I wanted him and his wife to meet this woman who was going to become a part of my life. It is a family from the chambers through the rest of your career, particularly if you stay in that geographical area. In my current position, while I was the chief of the office in Washington, D.C., I started to reach out to law schools to develop the relationships necessary for internship programs. Unfortunately, I didn't get to fully develop that before I left. A number of Social Security hearing offices have those relationships already established. So if you're looking for that experience or that way to demonstrate that you can do the job, then an externship or an internship is the perfect opportunity, and I would urge you to pursue it with everything you have. You will not regret it. In my current office in Fayetteville, I'm a little off the beaten path, so I'm not close enough to a law school to be fortunate enough to develop one of those relationships, although Campbell University and I have talked about it at length. So they are available, as I said before, a little bit of research will go a long way, and I would urge you to follow up on those opportunities wherever you can find them.
Great, thank you so much. Judge Bailey, can you tell us about the ABA section of Litigation Judicial Internship Opportunity Program and the ABA Judicial Clerkship Program?
I can. So there, by the way, I'm noticing, because I can see them, there are so many questions. We're just not going to get to them, and there are so many good questions. I hope we've answered them in our general presentation here. But let me talk about these two programs, and we thank you for your interest, as evidenced by the questions that you're asking, which are all right on. So the two programs that I wanted to talk to you about are the JIOP program and the Judicial Clerkship program. The JIOP program is a program of the litigation section. They administer it now and run it, and it's an opportunity for diverse candidates to have an opportunity to work in a judicial chambers in the summertime. It's for about a 6-week period in the summer, and you can see the list of cities in which it operates. It doesn't operate nationwide yet. You are paid a stipend through the ABA for your work in this regard, and in addition to working, hand in hand with a judge and the judge's chambers, law clerks, etc. Over the summer, the ABA JIOP program also offers a number of networking and training programs in the various cities in which they operate. Now, how to do this? Go to the website and research it. It'll tell you how to apply, and you will be interviewed. There's pretty much a guarantee of that from what I understand. I'm sorry to say that for next summer, the time for applying ran out in early January, and so it's usually in December or early January. It's kind of a moving target. Keep an eye on it for next year. If you're a 1L, you might want to give it a try next year. And then I'll talk about the Judicial Clerkship program. That program is one that the ABA runs at its mid-year meeting, and it also is addressed to particularly to diverse law students. But I have seen a variety of law students that participate in the program. What it is a 3-day intensive pre-clerkship program. Can you advance the slide, somebody? There we go. And that program, and I'll bet Judge Ridgway has participated too. Have you, Lisa?
Yes, I have.
It's
fantastic.
A great program. It's a 3-day program. You will have panel discussions. You'll be assigned to a table. There will be maybe 4 or 5 law students, at least 2 judges at the table, and you're assigned to that table for the entire 3 days. There will be panel discussions on a variety of things that are of interest to potential law clerks. There are actual research and writing exercises with you and the judges, so that you're given a problem, and then you write a brief memo that is reviewed by those judges and perhaps others. There is LexisNexis provides research support at the program. There are a number of, and this is the most important part, social events in which you can meet the other law students, meet the judicial division judges that are there from all over the country, from state and federal courts. So how do you get involved in this? Well, if your law school, it's based on your law school being willing and able to participate, and they make a 3-year commitment. You should go to your law school administration and tell them if you're interested in them participating in the Judicial Clerkship program. They would send 3, 5, 7 law students every year in February. This year it's in San Diego, so not a bad place to be. And the commitment on their part is to pay the expenses of the law students in attending the program. But many, I can speak personally about this, many internships and clerkships have come from participation in the ABA Judicial Clerkship program, and not just with me, but through me. So I meet a student, the student is in is in Chattanooga and would like to work in the Western Tennessee area for a federal judge, I might recommend that person, and they'll get an internship. And that has happened with people that I've met, and I now follow their careers. They're in touch with me and tell me how things are going. So the ABA Judicial Clerkship Program is another way for you to get placed and to get to be able to show judges on the state and federal level what you can do. So that's about where we are.
Great. And so at this point, I guess I'll leave the decision up to you, Judge Bailey, if you would like to take a couple questions from our pool of questions, or how you'd like to handle that.
Maybe I can let others do it. As you know, I have an appointment, so I'm going to have to dash pretty quickly if others are willing to stay on, and I normally would be. But
this is Judge Ridgway. I just sent a message to the rest of you. I'm willing to stay on for 15 to 30 minutes, but I will need someone to feed me the questions since I can't see them.
Right.
Absolutely.
This is Barbara. I can't see questions either, but I could stay on for probably until maybe 2:30, so another 15, 20 minutes.
Sure.
Okay, I'm gonna.
Thank you, Judge Bailey.
I'm going to sign off, Jordan, and everyone. I want to thank the panelists so much for their hard work on this, and I think it's been a very, very useful program, and I hope others will listen to it online. I thank you all, and so Jordan will feed some questions, and I know there's some good ones there.
Right. Fine. So thank you so much, Judge. One of the interesting questions I saw was from a student who is an international student. He asked, in your opinion, how often do you think courts hire international students as law clerks, and how beneficial do you think a clerkship would be for an international student trying to find a job after the clerkship?
This is Lisa Ridgway, judge on the U.S. Court of International Trade. I'll take the first crack at that. Unfortunately, due to a law that was passed some years ago, most federal jobs, and that includes clerkships in both the executive branch and the judicial branch, are limited to U.S. citizens, except under certain very narrow exceptions. So, as a practical matter, judicial clerkships are going to be closed to most international students unless they have dual nationality, with the United States. On the other hand, that's not true for internships. Now, internships, of course, are not paid, although sometimes there will be stipends available through the law school and things like that. So it's sometimes, but the federal government can't pay. But they are terrific opportunities, and some judges on courts of general jurisdiction, and certainly judges here on my court at the U.S. Court of International Trade, are very happy to take international students and often do take them as interns.
Great.
This is Barbara Gilmore, and I just want to add that in addition to U.S. citizens, because we've run up against this issue, there are some treaty countries with the United States where we were able to take those individuals as a law clerk. One of the first people I clerked with when I began my career as a law clerk was a citizen of the Dominican Republic, and that was a treaty company that she was able to get approval for to clerk as a bankruptcy clerk. But we have had people in the past who have hold citizenship with countries that were not treaty, what I have come to call the treaty countries, and they were not able to accept jobs here.
Yeah, I think, Barbara, what you may be speaking about is that the law, federal law, used to allow NATO treaty and friendship, commerce, and navigation, and that was changed a few years ago. So it's much more restrictive now, much more restrictive, unfortunately, in my view.
That is terrible. That is unfortunate.
If anyone has any specific questions, I would encourage you to get in touch with me. I'd be happy to help you figure it out.
Thank you for that clarification. Another interesting question that was posed is, Assume a student is wanting to apply for a position with a bankruptcy judge, but their writing sample relates to disability law or another not related area of the law. Is that a disadvantage or an automatic reason to decline the application?
This is Barbara. Not at all. I think Judge Ridgway or may have been the one who mentioned that we don't expect that the writing sample is necessarily going to parallel the area of the law of the court that you're applying to. So, no, not at all.
Great. And another question relating to the writing sample is it acceptable to submit part of a brief that was completed as part of a legal writing course as your writing sample?
Definitely. We see it all the time.
And kind of a follow-up question that I would have for that is just assume that you wrote a brief for a different internship. How would you go about tailoring that to be an acceptable writing sample? So you include like real people.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is Judge Ridgway, and Barbara, please jump in. The only issue, of course, is going to be masking the identity if it's not a public document. So if it's an internal memorandum, then you're going to need to redact details. It's names. It may even be more than names. On the other hand, if it's something that was filed in court, then it's a public document, and there's no need to redact unless it was filed under seal, which would be extremely unusual.
I agree, although what I think you probably want to do in an abundance of caution is if you've written something for another judge, seek that judge's permission and say, I would like to use the memo that I wrote for you or the draft of this that I wrote for you as my writing sample. Are you okay with that?
Great, that's very helpful, thank you. And probably one last question. For students who are attending a lower tier law school, how would you recommend those students presenting themselves so that they can compete with those students who are applying from higher tier law schools?
Can I take that one, Jordan?
Sure.
I would go back to my own experience, which is to show that you can do the job by other means, externships, internships, and by doing the writing and the research and getting that experience and the hopefully the recommendation of a judge that comes along with it, I think you're lining yourself up to be much more competitive. And I've got to go, so I'm going to hang up now, but I'm glad to have the chance to participate, and I hope that it's been helpful.
Great, thank you so much.
This is Barbara. I would add one of the best law clerks I ever worked with was a young woman who went to what some in this area would call a second-tier law school, and she went because she had a full scholarship and made the decision that she was not going to come out in debt.
Great, thank you so much. I think this would be a good spot to wrap up, and so I just want to say to our faculty for this program, Judge Frank Bailey, Barbara Gilmore, Judge Delissa Ridgway, and Judge John Flawley, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. On behalf of the ABA, I'm Jordan Glasgow, and I thank you all for joining us. As a reminder, ABA membership is now free for law students. With no worries about dues, now all law students can access the ABA resources, build networks, and develop professionally. And so visit our website, which is abaforlawstudents.org, for more information. And finally, before leaving, please wait for the evaluation to come up on your screen. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.